My father always said that some people are born to lead, and others are born to be the dirt beneath their boots. For 24 years, he made sure I knew exactly which one I was. He called me a mistake, a worthless investment. But as I sit here in a high-back leather chair inside his private office on Capitol Hill, the most powerful senator in the state is leaning forward, hanging onto my every word. My father is standing in the hallway, sweating through his expensive Italian suit, waiting for a meeting he'll never get. Because today, the mistake is the only one holding the keys to his survival. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but in the humid, cutthroat world of Miami high society, I prefer it served with a side of absolute, crushing irony. You see, my father, Arthur Sterling, didn't just dislike me. He despised the very fact that I shared his DNA. To him, I was a ghost in a house built on ego and old money. I was the daughter who studied too much and talked too little, the girl who didn't fit into his vision of a corporate dynasty. "You're a placeholder, Maya," he'd tell me, swirling his scotch while looking right through me. "A tax write-off. Don't expect a seat at the table when you haven't even figured out how to set it." That was the baseline of my childhood. Every achievement I had was minimized. Every dream was mocked. When I graduated at the top of my law class, he didn't attend. He sent a generic bouquet of grocery store lilies with a card that read, "Now try to find someone to actually hire you." He thought he was breaking me. He thought he was ensuring I stayed under his thumb, a quiet little disappointment he could hide away during his charity galas. What he didn't realize was that while he was busy building his empire on the backs of exploited workers and shady zoning laws, I was building something else. I was building a network. I was learning the language of power, the kind of power that doesn't need to scream to be heard. Living in a city like Miami, you learn early on that reputation is a currency, but secrets are gold. And my father had plenty of them. He treated people like disposable tissues, from the waitstaff at his private club to the junior associates at Sterling Holdings. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the Sterling name was a bulletproof vest. But here's the thing about bulletproof vests: they don't protect you if the shooter is already inside the house. For 3 years, I worked in the shadows. I took a job as a low-level researcher for a nonprofit, or so he thought. He laughed when I told him, "Saving the world on a teacher's salary? Predictable," he sneered. He didn't bother to look at the letterhead. He didn't see the name Vance and Associates. He didn't know that my research involved deconstructing the very legislative loopholes he used to bypass environmental regulations for his new coastal development project. I wasn't just working a job, I was performing an autopsy on his career. The tension in our house, if you can even call that cold marble museum a house, was thick enough to choke on. My mother had long since checked out, numbing herself with expensive spas and socialite circles to avoid Arthur's verbal lashings. That left me as his primary target. Every dinner was an interrogation. Every silence was a judgment. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. Arthur was celebrating the imminent approval of the North Shore project, a multi-billion-dollar deal that would effectively destroy a protected wetland and displace hundreds of low-income families. He was at the head of the table, booming with laughter, surrounded by his yes men. "To the future," he toasted, his eyes finally landing on me at the far end of the table. "And to Maya, who I'm sure will find a way to protest this from her cubicle. It's a shame you didn't inherit my brain, sweetheart. You might have actually been worth something to this family." The table went silent. Even his sycophants looked uncomfortable. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just took a slow sip of my water, looked him dead in the eye, and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator who just saw the trap spring shut. "You're right, Dad," I said quietly. "I didn't inherit your brain. I inherited my grandmother's. The one who actually built the foundation of this company before you turned it into a playground for your ego." He slammed his hand on the table, the silverware rattling loudly. "Get out. If you think you're so superior, find your own way. Don't use my cars, don't use my name, and don't you dare think you're coming back when you realize the world doesn't give a damn about your potential." I stood up, tucked my chair in perfectly, and walked out without a word. I didn't take a car. I took an Uber to a small apartment in Brickell that I'd been paying for in secret for 6 months. I knew what was coming. I knew that the North Shore project wasn't just a deal, it was his all-in bet. He had leveraged everything on it: his reputation, his remaining capital, and his political favors. He was certain Senator Thomas Miller was in his pocket. He was certain the vote next Tuesday was a formality. What he didn't know was that Senator Miller has a very long memory, and he also has a very particular taste for justice. As I lay in my new, quiet apartment that night, watching the city lights flicker, I felt a strange sense of peace. The worthless daughter was gone, the architect was here, and tomorrow the senator would be calling. The first thing you learn about men like my father is that they don't just want to win, they want to watch everyone else lose. To Arthur Sterling, my exit from the house wasn't a tragedy, it was a cleanup. He probably spent that first night toasted with expensive bourbon, celebrating the fact that he finally purged the weak link from his legacy. But while he was busy deleting my existence, I was opening a laptop that contained his entire world in a series of encrypted folders. Monday morning hit Miami with the kind of oppressive heat that makes the asphalt feel like it's melting. I walked into the offices of the Legislative Oversight Committee, not as Arthur Sterling's daughter, but as Maya Rodriguez, using my mother's maiden name. I had spent months as a ghost researcher, feeding data to Senator Miller's top aides. They knew me as the girl with the ironclad data. They didn't know I was the girl who had overheard the very secrets I was documenting while passing hors d'oeuvres at my father's garden parties. The North Shore project was Arthur's crown jewel. On paper, it was a luxury development that promised jobs and urban renewal. In reality, it was a massive environmental catastrophe waiting to happen, built on land that had been illegally rezoned through a series of shell companies. I remember sitting in my small Brickell apartment, the air conditioning humming a nervous rhythm, as I cross-referenced the senator's public stance on coastal conservation with my father's private ledgers. I wasn't just looking for a mistake. I was looking for the jugular. The phone rang at 10 a.m. It was Senator Miller's chief of staff. Maya, the senator has reviewed the brief on the North Shore zoning. He's disturbed. He wants you in the office this afternoon. And he wants to know how a junior researcher found records that the state auditors missed for 5 years. I took a deep breath. Tell him I have a very good ear for whispers in loud rooms. While I was preparing for the meeting of my life, my father was busy being himself. I found out later through an old contact at his firm that he had spent that morning berating his legal team because the senator hadn't returned his latest campaign contribution phone call. Arthur was getting nervous, though he'd never admit it. He was a man who believed money could buy gravity if you spent enough of it. He had no idea the laws of physics were about to change. I arrived at the senator's office wearing a suit I'd bought with my own savings. No designer labels, no sterling flash, just sharp, professional, and ready for war. Senator Thomas Miller is a man of the old school. He values loyalty, but he loathes being handled. My father had spent the last decade trying to handle him. "Sit down, Maya," the senator said, gesturing to the chair. He held up my report. "This is a surgical strike. You've linked the offshore accounts of the holding company directly to the construction firm's slush fund. Do you realize what this does to the North Shore project?" "It kills it, sir," I said firmly. "And it opens an investigation into everyone who signed off on the initial environmental impact study." The senator leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "Arthur Sterling is the lead developer. He's a powerful man in this state. He's also, if I recall correctly, a man who shares your eyes. Why are you handing me his head on a silver platter?" This was the moment. I could have lied. I could have played the concerned citizen. But I knew the senator respected truth more than optics. "Because for 24 years he told me I was worthless," I replied, my voice steady. "He thinks power is about how many people you can crush. I think power is about making sure people like him can't crush anyone else. I'm not here as his daughter, I'm here as the person who knows where he buried the shovels." The senator didn't smile, but I saw a glint of something like respect in his gaze. He's coming here at 3 p.m. today. He thinks we're finalizing the land grant. He's bringing his lawyers and his ego. I know, I said. I'd like to be in the room. As what? He asked. As your new lead consultant on coastal integrity, I replied. After all, I've already done the work. The next few hours were a blur of high-stakes preparation. I felt a strange cocktail of adrenaline and cold, hard clarity. I wasn't doing this out of a petty grudge, well, maybe a little. But mostly, I was doing it because the world Arthur Sterling lived in was a lie. He believed he was the architect of his own greatness, but he was really just a thief who got lucky. At 2:55 p.m., I heard the heavy, confident footsteps in the hallway. I knew that walk. It was the walk of a man who owned the floor he stood on. I was tucked away in the inner office, behind the heavy oak door, listening as my father was ushered into the senator's reception area. I heard his voice, booming, arrogant, dripping with that fake old boy camaraderie. Thomas, good to see you. I hope you've got the champagne ready. This North Shore deal is going to put this state on the map. I stood up and smoothed my jacket. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was a cold, steady beat. The senator looked at me and nodded. Wait for my signal, he whispered. Through the door, I heard the senator's voice, cold as an Atlantic winter. Actually, Arthur, we have some new data to discuss. Someone has brought a few irregularities to my attention, deeply concerning ones. Data? Arthur laughed, that sharp, condescending sound I'd heard my entire life. From who? Some disgruntled clerk. Send them to my office. I'll have them fired by 5. Now let's talk about the ribbon cutting. I don't think you'll be firing this person, Arthur, the senator said. In fact, I think you should meet her. The senator looked at me. It was time. The heavy oak door creaked open with calm confidence, and for a split second the air in the room seemed to vanish. I stepped through the threshold, my heels rhythmic clicking on the polished wood floor. My father was leaning over the senator's desk, a gold fountain pen in his hand, looking like a man who had already won. When he heard the door, he didn't even look up at first. Thomas, really, I don't have time for a meet and greet with your staff? Then he saw me. The color didn't just leave his face, it was as if his entire soul retreated. His hand froze in midair, the gold pen trembling just enough to be noticed. For the first time in my life, Arthur Sterling looked small. He looked at my suit, he looked at the folder in my hand, and then he looked at the senator, searching for the punchline to a joke he didn't understand. Maya, he stammered, his voice losing its booming resonance. What the hell are you doing here? Did you sneak in through the service entrance? Get out before you embarrass yourself further. Even now, faced with the impossible, his first instinct was to diminish me. It was his muscle memory, but I didn't flinch. I didn't feel that familiar pang of shame. Instead, I felt a wave of profound, icy calm. I didn't sneak in, Arthur, I said, intentionally stripping him of the title of Dad. I was invited. Senator Miller, if you'd look at page 14 of the addendum, you'll see the direct link between the shell company Emerald Tide and the offshore account in the Caymans. The one Arthur here thought was invisible. My father's eyes bulged. You've been spying on me, you little thief. Thomas, surely you aren't listening to this. She's a disgruntled child. She's doing this because I cut her off. She's worthless. She has no idea how business works. The senator held up a hand, a single gesture that silenced the room. He looked at my father with a disgusted pity that was far more damaging than anger. Arthur, sit down and keep your mouth shut. If you say one more word about this young woman's worth, I'll have the bailiffs remove you before we even get to the criminal referrals. Criminal referrals. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. My father sank into the leather chair, the same chair I had been sitting in earlier. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had inverted. Maya isn't just a researcher, Arthur, the senator continued, leaning back and lacing his fingers. She's the reason I didn't sign my name to a felony today. She brought me a 300-page audit of your North Shore project. It's meticulous, it's brilliant, and quite frankly, it's the most impressive piece of legislative forensics I've seen in a decade. I watched my father's face. He was trying to process the fact that the daughter he called a tax write-off had just dismantled $1 billion empire with a keyboard and a library card. I could see the gears turning, the desperate attempt to find a way to spin this to buy me off to charm his way out. "Maya, honey," he said, his voice suddenly dropping into a manipulative, paternal warmth that turned my stomach. "You've clearly misunderstood some of the filings. Business at this level is complicated. Why don't we go home? We can talk about this. I'll give you a VP position. You've proven you have the sterling spark after all." I almost laughed. "The sterling spark? Is that what you call fraud, Arthur? And I don't have a home. You told me to find my own way, remember? You told me the world didn't give a damn about my potential." I walked over to the desk and laid a single sheet of paper in front of him. It wasn't a legal document. It was the grocery store flower card he had sent me when I graduated law school. "Now try to find someone to actually hire you." "I found someone," I whispered. "The state of Florida. And they're very interested in your complicated business." The senator cleared his throat. "Arthur, the North Shore project is dead. Effective immediately, the zoning permits are revoked. Furthermore, the Oversight Committee is launching a full inquiry into Sterling Holdings. You'll be receiving a subpoena by the end of the business day." My father looked at the card, then at the senator, then at me. The arrogance was gone. In its place was a raw, naked fear. He realized that for the last 24 years he hadn't been ignoring a worthless girl. He had been feeding a fire that was now consuming everything he built. "You'll ruin us," he hissed, the mask of the loving father slipping to reveal the monster underneath. "The Sterling name will be mud. You're destroying your own inheritance." "I don't want your money, Arthur," I replied, standing tall. "I want your accountability. You see, you were wrong about one thing. You told me I was the dirt beneath your boots. But you forgot that dirt is where things grow. And you're just the man who's about to lose his boots." He went to stand up to lash out, but the senator's security detail was already at the door. The meeting was over. The Titan had fallen, and he had been brought down by the very person he thought wasn't even worth a seat at the table. But the real sting was yet to come. Because while the North Shore project was dead, the story was just beginning to leak to the press. And I was the one holding the microphone. As the guards escorted him out, he turned back one last time, his eyes searching mine for a flicker of the girl he used to bully. He didn't find her. He only found a professional who was just getting started. "This isn't over, Maya," he spat. "Oh, it is for you," I said, turning back to the senator. "Now, sir, shall we discuss the rehabilitation plan for the families Arthur tried to displace?" Watching my father's back as he was escorted out of the senator's office was like watching a mountain crumble in slow motion. For my entire life, that man had been an immovable object, a shadow so large it blotted out the sun. But in the span of 30 minutes, he had become a footnote in his own downfall. The senator waited until the heavy doors clicked shut before he let out a long, weary breath. "You realize what happens next, Maya?" Senator Miller asked, his eyes fixed on the folders spread across his desk. "This isn't just a corporate hiccup. This is a landslide. The press is going to catch wind of the North Shore cancellation within the hour. By tomorrow, Sterling Holdings will be a Shark Tank." "I'm counting on it," I replied. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The emotional weight I expected to feel, the guilt, the hesitation was absent. All that remained was a cold, clinical focus. Arthur Sterling's power didn't come from his talent, it came from the illusion of invincibility. Once the public sees the cracks, the people he spent years stepping on will finally stand up. The senator looked at me for a long beat. "You've got your mother's steel, kid, and your own brand of fire. I need you to stay on as a special consultant through the investigation. We need someone who knows the internal filing systems of Sterling Holdings, someone who can point us to the ghost ledgers." I nodded. "I'll do it on one condition. I want the displaced families from the North Shore District to have first right of refusal on any new, sustainable development that takes its place. We don't just stop the destruction. We start the repair. Consider it done," he said. As I walked out of the Capitol building, the Miami sun felt different. It didn't feel like an oppressive weight, it felt like a spotlight. I pulled out my phone. I had 17 missed calls from my father, 12 from his lawyers, 3 from my mother. I ignored them all and dialed a number I'd kept in my contacts for a year under the name The Architect. "It's done," I said when the voice answered. "The senator pulled the plug, the subpoenas are being drafted." "And Arthur?" the voice asked. "He's exactly where he deserves to be, he's in the dark." I spent the next 48 hours in a whirlwind. The news broke exactly as the senator predicted. The Miami Herald ran a headline that felt like poetry: "North Shore project collapses amid fraud allegations, Sterling Empire under fire." By the second day, the vultures were circling. Arthur's board of directors, men who had spent years laughing at his jokes and ignoring his cruelty, were now releasing statements distancing themselves from him. It was the quintessential American corporate betrayal. As soon as the money stops flowing, the loyalty evaporates. I was sitting in a small cafe watching the news ticker on a wall-mounted TV when my mother finally reached me. Her voice was trembling. "Maya, what have you done? Your father is, he's in a state. He's talking about lawsuits, about disowning you officially. He's saying you're a traitor." "He already disowned me, Mom," I said, my voice soft but firm. "He did it every day for 24 years. He just didn't realize that when you throw someone away, you lose the right to call them a traitor when they find a better team. He's losing everything, Maya, the house, the cars. They're freezing the accounts." "He's not losing everything," I countered. "He's just losing the things he used to hide who he really is. Tell him to look at the bright side. He finally has the uncluttered life he always told me I'd have." I hung up. I wasn't being cruel, I was being honest. Arthur Sterling lived in a world where people were assets or liabilities. He had classified me as a liability for decades. I had simply balanced the books. But the final confrontation wasn't going to happen in a boardroom or over a phone call. It happened 3 nights later. I was leaving the senator's office late when I saw a familiar black sedan idling near the curb. The driver wasn't his usual chauffeur. Arthur was behind the wheel himself. He looked haggard, his tie loosened, the pristine image of the great Arthur Sterling completely shattered. I didn't run. I walked right up to the driver's side window. He rolled it down, and for a moment we just looked at each other. The silence was louder than the city traffic around us. "You think you're a hero," he rasped. His voice sounded like broken glass. "You destroyed a legacy. You destroyed your own name." "No," I said, leaning down so our eyes were level. "I saved the name. From now on, when people hear Sterling, they won't think of a man who cheated his way to the top. They'll think of the woman who stayed at the bottom until she had enough evidence to bring him down. You told me I was worthless, Arthur, but it turns out I'm the most expensive mistake you ever made." He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "I gave you everything, the best schools, the best clothes, and not a single second of respect," I interrupted. "You didn't give me a life, you gave me a cage. I just learned how to pick the lock." I straightened up and began to walk away. "Maya," he yelled, "where are you going? You can't just leave me like this." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. "Watch me. It's what you've been doing my whole life anyway." The investigation was just beginning, and the evidence I'd gathered was enough to keep a dozen lawyers busy for years. But as I walked toward the train station, leaving the expensive car and the broken man behind, I realized that the revenge wasn't the subpoenas or the headlines. The real revenge was the fact that for the first time in my life, I didn't care what he thought. But there was one final piece of the puzzle. The senator hadn't told me everything about why he was so quick to trust a junior researcher. And as I looked at a photo in the morning paper the next day, I saw a familiar face in the background of a gala from 30 years ago, my mother, standing next to a young Thomas Miller. The plot wasn't just mine, it was deeper than I ever imagined. The revelation of that old photograph changed everything. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was a long overdue debt. I sat in my office at the Capitol, staring at the grainy image of my mother and Senator Miller. They looked young, hopeful, and entirely different from the people they had become. It hit me then. I wasn't the first Sterling woman Arthur had tried to crush. He had stolen my mother's spirit decades ago, but he hadn't realized she'd left a trail for me to follow. I realized my mother hadn't been checked out all those years. She had been surviving. She had been the one who quietly left certain folders unlocked. She was the one who whispered the names of offshore accounts while she thought I was asleep. She knew I was the only one with enough sterling steel to actually finish what she couldn't start. A week later, the final blow landed. The Department of Justice officially opened an investigation into Sterling Holdings for racketeering and environmental fraud. The news vans were permanently parked outside our family estate. My father, the man who once controlled the skyline of Miami, was now a prisoner in his own home, waiting for the inevitable knock at the door. Senator Miller called me into his office one last time. The room felt lighter now. The heavy tension of the North Shore project had been replaced by the quiet hum of progress. "The grand jury has seen enough, Maya," the senator said, sliding a document across the desk. "They're moving for an indictment. Your testimony and the digital trail you provided are the bedrock of the entire case. But there's something else." He paused, looking at the same photograph I had found. "Your mother was a brilliant strategist, Maya. Arthur didn't just marry her for her beauty, he married her to neutralize his biggest competitor. He spent 30 years trying to make her believe she was nothing. When I saw you walk into this office with that same fire in your eyes, I knew the debt was finally going to be paid." "You did this for her," I whispered. "I did it for justice," Miller corrected with a small, knowing smile. "But seeing Arthur's face when you walked in, that was just a very deserved bonus." The fallout was spectacular. Sterling Holdings filed for Chapter 11. The invincible empire was carved up and sold off to pay for legal fees and restitution. The North Shore land was donated back to the city for a permanent ecological preserve, the Elena Sterling Preserve, named after my mother. I stood at the podium during the dedication ceremony, the salty Miami breeze whipping through my hair. For the first time, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't a ghost in someone else's house. I was the architect of a new reality. My mother sat in the front row, her eyes bright and clear, looking at me with a pride that didn't need words. As for Arthur, he wasn't there. He was sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting trial. He had tried to post bail, but his friends had all vanished. The men who once clamored for his attention wouldn't even take his collect calls. He was experiencing the very thing he feared most, being irrelevant, being worthless. After the ceremony, I walked down to the water's edge. The construction cranes that once threatened this land were gone. In their place, the birds were returning. The world was healing, and so was I. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number, but I knew the tone. It was a final, desperate snarl from a cornered animal. "You think you won, you have nothing. No family, no legacy, no sterling name." I didn't delete it. I didn't even get angry. I simply typed back, "I don't need your name, Arthur. I'm doing just fine with my own." I blocked the number and tucked the phone away. I looked out at the horizon where the blue of the ocean met the blue of the sky. I learned revenge isn't anger, but it's actually about precision. It's about taking the very tools used to hold you down and using them to build a ladder. My father thought I was an investment that failed. He was wrong. I was the auditor he never saw coming. Today, the worthless daughter is a lead consultant for the state, a hero to the North Shore community, and a woman who can look in the mirror without seeing her father's shadow. Arthur Sterling built his life on a foundation of fear and ego. I built mine on the truth. And in the end, the truth is the only thing that actually has value. I turned away from the shore and walked toward the city. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the pavement. But for the first time in 24 years, I wasn't afraid of the dark, because I knew exactly who I was and I knew exactly what I was worth.